Just make sure that we are on the face. I don't think it's really called the Facebook, but I think that there we go. Go live. They like that part. Yes. Okay, perfect. Okay. So welcome everybody. We're so glad to have you. If we haven't met, I'm Mayer Cunningham, special education boss, helping families who sit at the IEP 504 table negotiate successful student outcomes. And that's anybody that sits at the IEP 504 table. And we are so excited tonight. We have the great Sarah Milem from Texas Hands and Voices, who's going to take some questions that we have from our members and families that have sent in and sent questions as it relates to deaf and hard of hearing services, what that looks like, what parents can do, resources to help you be more successful in your 504 IEP meetings, and just great resources, whether it's at home or in the community, or how to better serve your kiddo that has a disability in this category. And so, Sarah, welcome. Thank you so much for being on.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, and thank you. What I love about Sarah is she's very generous with her time, and she's very quick to correct me, which I love that. Not that I ever need any correcting, but we don't know what we don't know, and deaf or hard of hearing or a vision impairment or deafblind, those are low incident disabilities, and so I certainly want to learn as much as I can and have everybody out there in the internet world know about these resources and options and services, and really kind of how to access those services. I think for me as an advocate, because the percentage is so low for these kiddos, I just don't have that many kiddos that I serve that are impacted. They're deaf or hard of hearing, and so you have been such a valuable resource. Also, I want to talk about kind of the differences and what I see at IEP tables between kiddos that have a need for vision services, vision impairment, and or deaf and hard of hearing, what the gap is there, and how we can better work through those pieces. So welcome. If you feel comfortable, would you kind of share your story, how you came to be the international global leader for Texas Hands and Voices?
You give me such high praises. Yeah, quick bit about me. First of all, just have to say my little disclaimer, I am not an attorney. I'm an advocate just like everybody else. I do work for and with Texas Hands and Voices, which is a chapter of Hands and Voices National. And while I must say that, I definitely drink the Hands and Voices Kool-Aid, but of course, the views I expressed tonight are mine and not necessarily that of Hands and Voices. So now we got that out of the way. I work with Hands and Voices because I have a 15-year-old deaf child myself. Kind of came into the world of special education advocacy because we had started, and he was late diagnosis. We had started in a private school, didn't know what we didn't know. Eventually came upon Hands and Voices as a resource, learned a lot about what his needs were, what we needed to be doing. Ended up in a public school where he was the only deaf, hard of hearing child there and the only one they'd ever had. So we were, starting fresh, reinventing the wheel, and it was a new school. So we had to learn a lot. Fell in love with educational advocacy through that process. I have been through the fire myself, everything from the long, arduous IEP process to the state complaint process, the Office of Civil Rights complaint process, been through it all. And now I'm lucky enough to have the best job in the world. I do exactly what I love. And I work with a team of advocates in Texas, and we provide free advocacy support specifically for families that have deaf and hard of hearing kids, because the needs are just very, very different. We love also to consult with people like you, Karen, that are working with families that have deaf, hard of hearing kids. Any advocate, we're a resource to everyone. There are ASTRA programs throughout the country. There are advocates like us that are happy to collaborate, work with you, offer trainings. And yeah, that's just a bit about me.
Okay. Tell us about, did you say that your student was, for lack of a better word, late identified, or did you as a family realize later that he had this disability?
So he's considered late identified. He was identified through a preschool hearing screening. Yes, those are important. uh, Looking back, he probably should have failed his newborn screening, but we believe it probably wasn't done correctly from, that's a traumatic time around having a baby, and looking back, it's all a little fuzzy.
Right.
So at 4 years old, they told us, hey, your kid doesn't hear well. And we said, absolutely not. Um, we're certain he has ADD or something else going on. Nope, they were right. After a whole lot of money at the audiologist, turns out he didn't hear well. And there began the journey.
And so kind of around that, I just want to touch on that because forgive me, I'm certain that I say it wrong. So, it was auditory impairment. Now it's DHH. I heard you say earlier that I had a child that was deaf and then deaf, hard of hearing. Can you tell us, for those of us that want to be respectful and appropriate when we speak about individuals with a hearing loss, a hearing impairment that's a disability, what is the correct language?
So the term auditory impairment is phasing out. While that is the federal language, most states have moved to deaf and hard of hearing. That's typically the preferred language of the deaf community, and we want to respect that culturally. Ultimately, though, how each person identifies as a deaf or hard of hearing person is 100% up to them. So if you're not sure, ask. But deaf or hard of hearing is typically the preferred term. We're trying to get rid of those impairment words: impairment, handicap, disability.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And so and I just want to be clear, is it deaf and hard of hearing, or is it deaf or hard of hearing?
It depends on what you're talking about.
Okay.
So, and how someone identifies. So when we're referring to the group as a whole, we might call them deaf and hard of hearing children, or children that are deaf and hard of hearing. When we're speaking about an individual kid, we might say they're deaf or hard of hearing, or deaf and hard of hearing. When we're talking about one who is clearly identified, my son, speaking to hearing people and interacting in the general world, often will identify himself as I'm hard of hearing. If he's interacting with members of the deaf community, or if he's in a situation where he doesn't have time to explain the type of resources he needs, it's often easier to simply say he's deaf. People get that faster. When we hear hard of hearing, we think of old people that we just need to yell loud at. And so sometimes it is just more efficient to say that he's deaf. And now he self-identifies as deaf when I ask him.
Okay. And so when you identified or found out that your son was deaf or hard of hearing, kind of talk to us a little bit about before, when you were like, absolutely not, my cherub kid. Kind of tell us what that looks like for families that could find themselves in that situation.
Absolutely. So most children are diagnosed either at birth through the newborn hearing screening, or later on through a preschool or elementary aged hearing screening. In our particular situation, he was 4 years old. He was in preschool. The school called, said, hey, he did not pass one of his screenings. I said, yeah, I figured he would need glasses. They said, nope, the other one.
But what?
And I said, again, absolutely not. He was reading, he was speaking, he was doing the things I thought he should be doing. He was inattentive and rowdy and very much a boy, but nothing I considered too abnormal. We went to the pediatrician to get cleared, and she said, nope, he's not passing my screening either. So she sent us to an audiologist. A lot of insurance companies do not cover audiology services. So we paid a lot of money. I think at the time we paid $450 for that evaluation. And we sat in the booth, and I remember sitting in the booth with my arms crossed, mad, because I was young and broke and didn't have $450 for this mess. And they start playing the sounds, and he doesn't budge. And my heart sank. He really wasn't hearing everything I thought he was hearing. So they referred us out for hearing aids, we began that process, but at no point in any of that did anyone tell us what should happen at the school level. They were worried about the medical piece, the fixing piece, not how do we make this work in his day-to-day life, school, education, all of that.
Right. So you've identified the deaf and hard of hearing. Do they give you a piece of paper? Do they say get hearing aids? Do they tell you what the range is? How would parents even know what that range is?
You hope you have a good pediatric audiologist at this point. And a good pediatric audiologist is going to put your child's hearing loss on a graph and show you these are the sounds they can hear and these are the sounds they can't hear. And here's the parts of words they can and cannot hear. A lot of the times families that are referred to us at Hands and Voices, not for our advocacy, but for our parent guide program, is because families didn't get great explanations and we're helping them decode what happened. They'll make a referral for hearing aids. Oftentimes they do those in-house. And if you're lucky, at some point in all of this, your audiologist tells you if they're littler that you should contact ECI, or if they're older that you should contact someone about one of those 504 IEP things. And that's about it. So families are really kind of left to that on their own.
Right. So let's talk about the, had a parent found out. Let's talk about the ECI thing. Share with the parent what that is.
So ECI, early childhood intervention, is the services for children birth to 3 that are under federal IDEA law. In most states, your early intervention is going to come into your home, do evaluations. And because your child is deaf or blind, they will typically also connect directly with the school district, even at that young age, which is not the same as our other IEP eligibilities. Typically, you're just ECI and then you transition to the school. When we're talking about deaf, hard of hearing children, they get those teachers of the deaf and those school resources much earlier, typically.
And so a parent, let's say that a parent sort of like you, didn't know about that option. They weren't 18 months to 3 years. They find out minutes before we're going into school, kindergarten. What does that 504 IEP, what's that 504 IEP thing?
So yeah, I found out the day before a kindergarten tour.
Oh.
And I was crying to principals going, what do I do? And they weren't sure either. So the next steps for a parent are to take your diagnosis and let the school know that you need your child to have an evaluation. Put it in writing, send them an email. We have found out my child has some level of hearing loss, and we need to have a full evaluation so we can figure out what their needs are. That's step 1, just like anything else.
Can I just stop you right there? So what's a full evaluation?
So we all typically know the basics. We're going to look at cognitive, we're going to look at reading, writing, arithmetic, all the basics. But for a deaf or hard of hearing kid, it's going to include some extras. So, for example, we need to know not just what they hear in a sound booth, but what are they hearing actually in a live classroom? That could be very different things. When we're looking at their language, it's not as simple as just do they have basic vocabulary. Deaf and hard of hearing kids often don't pick up what we call incidental language, that language that happens all around that we overhear. One of the great examples that was given to me is, as a little girl, often you overhear your mom talking on her phone to Aunt Sally, and they're making fun of the lady at church who wore white shoes after Labor Day. And so you as a child begin to pick up, that's a thing I don't do. Right. Children that are deaf and hard of hearing don't get that information because it wasn't said directly to them. Right. Even with great equipment, it just doesn't pick up those side conversations. And for a child that uses ASL, unless it is signed within their peripheral, they don't get that information. So we're looking for that. We're looking for how they're picking up incidental language. We're looking for pragmatic language, idioms, figures of speech. We often talk about children with hearing loss have holes in their language development. It's not that there's necessarily even huge gaps, it's little holes in different pieces, and we're trying to fill all the little Swiss cheese holes. Another big thing we have to look at for these kids is their self-advocacy and what we call their compensatory skills. How are they able to help themselves in a classroom? And that's everything from, do they know how to change their batteries? Do they know how to work their equipment? Do they know how to use an interpreter or, access the school nurse if something goes wrong with their hearing aids? When they're older, do they know, how to work 504 accommodations at the college level, contact the Office of Disability Services? There's a million things that go into what those kids need, and we call that the expanded core curriculum. So in most cases, we are looking at what do they need to be academically successful. And when we're talking about are they eligible for special education, we're saying what of those basic education needs are there holes in that we need to fill in. For deaf and hard of hearing kids, we look at the same thing, but then we also have to ask, is there additional content we need to teach them outside of the standard academic stuff in order for them to be successful? So it's more core curriculum.
Right. And so when you talk about that, which I love the way you talk about that, just first identifying a kiddo. I know that if I have a kiddo that has a vision impairment, when I'm asking for evaluations, and I've done that for a while, I'm going to make sure that whoever is giving that cognitive test, that achievement test, that adaptive behavior, that somebody's overseeing them that has some sort of, I was going to say learning, that's good English, some sort of, knowledge base around a kiddo with a sensory disability. Is that a recommendation if a child is deaf or hard of hearing as well?
Absolutely. We always want to make sure there's a teacher of the deaf involved, that there's someone able to interpret the results of those assessments that is familiar with deaf and hard of hearing kids, help design the assessments in a way that is effective for a deaf or hard of hearing child. Now in Texas, a certified teacher of the deaf must be at every IEP meeting, even if there's a suspected hearing loss.
Okay.
That varies slightly state to state, but in general, there should be a teacher of the deaf at the table when you're discussing a deaf child.
Okay.
We also want to make sure that everyone at the table is given enough information to make even knowledgeable input on this deaf and hard of hearing child. So that may require a little work ahead of time before we even come to the table, so everyone knows what they're talking about.
Right. So when we talk about when everybody knows what they're talking about, I have the blessing being on, as an advocate, I get to look at a kiddo with their whole file, right? Their academics, their behavior, their functional needs. It's my experience, and maybe it's just me, that these service providers, it feels like they're in isolation, even if they're the DHH itinerant teacher or the VI teacher. And I feel like that the entire committee defers to them. Cindy Smith, you're the whatever. And it's also my experience when I say ECC that I might have 7 heads, right? And so I don't say it as eloquently as you do. I just say, I'm like, it's more curriculum than we expect the general education teacher to do. But it's even more of a gap when it comes to my kiddos that are DHH. Like, everybody's like, what are you talking about? And so what is the responsibility as it relates to a DHH itinerant teacher to the IEP committee, right? Because maybe parents don't have an advocate, or their advocate doesn't specialize in this, or it's just them. What is their response, the DHH person, teacher, what's their responsibility to the committee? Is it prior? Is it collaborative? Is it overseeing things? Tell us that.
Unfortunately, the deaf and hard of hearing legislation and community has not done as good of a job as the blind community in standardizing what should happen, for a million reasons that are too long to get into on this chat. But state to state, it really, unfortunately, varies. One important thing to look at is if your state has what's called a Deaf Child Bill of Rights. That'll often lay out more clearly what the responsibility of the school system is in educating your deaf and hard of hearing child. You also want to look up if your state, what it takes to become a deaf or hard of hearing teacher in your state, and if your state mandates the expanded core curriculum. Some states, very few, but some states do.
What are those states? Because I'm looking for them. I'm gonna have everybody move there.
I would have to look it up.
Okay.
But we often look towards Minnesota, Iowa, and even Georgia as good examples of states that are using expanded core curriculum appropriately and have developed really good expanded core curriculum standards. So that's kind of a good starting point. We also look closely at the NASD guidelines. That's the National Association of State Directors of Special Education. It's an awful acronym. But
Can you tell us that acronym again? And we're going to put that on Facebook, and then we'll also put it in the chat. So can you tell us again what that is? Or you can put it in the chat because you're smart like that.
Yep, I've got it right in front of me. So the NASD guidelines.
You can put it in the chat.
NASD guidelines are a really great set of guidelines that they have come up with specifically for deaf, hard of hearing kids at the national level. And they address all things evaluation and expanded core curriculum and language and terminology and modes of communication when it comes to deaf and hard of hearing kids. It's a great national resource you can pull on. And bonus, it came out after the ESSA Educational Act, so it includes ESSA guidance. So how this should all look under current laws. And what it discusses is what we call the full range of needs. So in IDEA, we know that we have to consider the full range of needs of a student. And for a deaf, hard of hearing child, there are special considerations. So what that means is we have to not only look at their academics, we have to look at their full range of needs, which through case law we know includes those social, emotional, self-advocacy, technology, etc. We also have to look at their preferred language and communication. We have to look at how and when they're able to communicate with peers in their language. So if you have a child that is an ASL user, do they have an opportunity to receive direct instruction in ASL and to communicate with others that use ASL regularly? And even just their ability to have deaf and hard of hearing peers, kids and friends that are like them. We all know that when you've met one deaf and hard of hearing kid, you've met one deaf and hard of hearing kid. None of them are alike, but there is a lot of power in them getting access to other children and other adults even that are facing similar struggles that they may be struggling with, and also have already conquered some of those same things. Our deaf kids need to be meeting deaf doctors and lawyers and scientists and engineers and all of those great things.
Right. So when you talked about, and you talked about this the other day, access to peers, because it's an LID, it's a low incident disability, what does that look like for kiddos in the gazillion schools in America if there are not other children their age, or you have a 10th grader and a first grader, we don't make them go in the same class. What is the ask for the school, or what's the recommendation?
So it can go a few different ways. In most states, we have some sort of center-based programs. In Texas, we call them our regional day schools for the deaf. And that is where we centralize services for deaf and hard of hearing kids so that those kids can all attend the same campuses together and receive those services together. And that is one way we do it. The other way is we get creative. When we have these onesie twosies in outside schools, we look at creating events, creating times for them to be together, and inviting them to events and services of that center-based program that may exist. Sharing information, and sometimes even through the IEP process, funding things like summer camps and discovery weekends, times for them to be with those peers and those deaf and hard of hearing role models and mentors. But all that brings us to the discussion of LRE, least restrictive environment. So it comes up a lot when we're talking about deaf and hard of hearing kids. Oh, but if we send them here where there's more deaf kids, that wouldn't be their LRE, their least restrictive environment. And in the deaf and hard of hearing world, we call that the language rich environment. It's not least restrictive for them if it's not language rich and in the company of their peers. It can leaving in their home campus can sometimes actually be more restrictive. And we're really lucky because the Department of Education actually put out some special guidance on this, clarifying that LRE for a deaf and hard of hearing kid is not necessarily their home school. And I've got a link to that actually too.
And that's where the regional schools come in, correct?
Yes. So your child can be sent to a regional day school program if they need specialized DHH services, if they need a self-contained classroom with specialized services, if they need access to interpreters or other service providers. Sometimes that can be a reason to send them there. However, that is not the only reason they can be sent to a regional day school or a center-based program. It is a valid argument to send a mainstreamed child to a center-based program where they continue in the majority of their mainstream classes, but through their special classes, extracurriculars, clubs, etc., they gain access to those other deaf and hard of hearing peers. So it's definitely another consideration and another tool that parents and schools have in their toolbox. And it's important to note that if the IEP team does agree that your child should attend one of these center-based programs, the transportation for that falls to the district. So it is not on you to transport them to that other school.
Fantastic. So when a parent has a child with this disability, how do they find out your vast amount of information and knowledge? Who would they call at their school? I always tell people to either call the IEP facilitator, the special education lead. Is it something that you do at the campus level? Or because it's a low incident disability, should we have them going to somebody at the district level for efficacy?
We always want to make sure when we're talking about a deaf or hard of hearing kid, we always want to make sure we have involved someone with a specialty in deaf and hard of hearing kids. Now, in some districts, they have their own in-district deaf and hard of hearing teacher. Great, let's make sure they're involved. Sometimes that'll mean going even outside of your district. Often districts will share services, and you may have to go to the next district over to find that person. But by going to your principal, your special education coordinator, whoever that is, they should be able to connect you to that deaf and hard of hearing person.
Okay. And when we have, so there's the option of the day schools that we talked about. Other than that, what does a student in a public school, if the parent's not wanting to send them to another campus, what's the best way to implement their IEP as it relates to those itinerant services at their home campus?
So itinerant services is when we decide that a child is going to stay at their home campus, but they still need the services of a deaf and hard of hearing teacher, we can send an itinerant teacher. That is a fully certified deaf and hard of hearing teacher who, instead of working in one classroom all day, travels to the kids' classrooms all day. So those services can be just like any other special ed resource. They can be pull out, they can be push in, and they can be consult, and often are a combination of the three. So that deaf, hard of hearing teacher can pull out a student on a regular basis to work directly with them. They can push into their classroom to work directly with them, and they can consult with the other staff, special education specialists, or whoever else is needed at that child's school on a regular basis to ensure all the proper accommodations are happening. The teachers don't have questions about how to service them, etc. In an ideal world, we're getting a little bit of each.
Okay. So in meetings, I'm asked, or my parents are asked, what is it you want from the DHH teacher? And I feel like that's more often than not unfair. And certainly we don't need you to tell us your 904,062 things that you could provide. But as it relates to a DHH itinerant teacher, what would be some of those things provided to the student and or the staff?
So we're kind of talking about two things at once here, and I want to make sure we connect them. What we're talking about is what services can an itinerant teacher provide, which is often also the same conversation as what makes my child still eligible for an IEP.
Okay.
What needs do they have that still require that direct instruction of some sort? So that's when I like to look at things like that Minnesota compensatory skills checklist or the Iowa expanded core curriculum. And I will go through those with families and we will look at them and say, okay, you know your child best, especially when it comes to their hearing differences. Let's go through these lists. Let's determine, okay, what of this can they do? What of this can't they do? Of these things they can't do, which of those things do you want to work on at home? And which of those things do we want to ask the school for help on? And that can look like a lot of different things. I mean, teaching a child to read their audiogram is an important skill for them, but maybe mom feels comfortable doing that, so it's not a big deal. Teaching a child, though, how to repair communication when they miss or don't understand something might need some direct instruction from their deaf and hard of hearing teacher. Maybe they need assistance, learning to speak up in a classroom, learning where to sit in a classroom so they have best visual access and the least noise interference. Where do they sit in a classroom so that they can see the board, the teacher, and the interpreter if it's needed? Those aren't skills that just come to children in their dreams, unfortunately.
Right.
And so all of those little things require some type of instruction.
Okay, perfect. And that really clears it up for me. I mean, gives it a good starting place. So we talked about, and I love the Iowa link that they have. That it's just so robust and it gives you great indicators about what a kiddo needs. What if a parent doesn't have the opportunity to fill out that rubric or kind of go through those items? How could they participate with that in the IEP meeting?
So as a parent, I would be looking at, okay, if my child is here now and my expectation is for them to be college bound or whatever your expectation is, what skills are they missing? And those skills go beyond reading, writing, math. What are the things as a parent I'm doing for them that they don't realize I'm doing? What are things that adults around them are just magically making happen that they don't understand are happening? And how can we make sure the kid is beginning to take on those responsibilities as they get older?
Okay. You and I talked the other day, something I didn't know, which is most things, is that the hearing aids, forgive me if I'm saying it wrong, or the FM system should be checked how often?
So the school has a responsibility to make sure their hearing aids and assistive technology are working on a daily basis. Especially with younger kids, it's really important that a listening check be happening regularly. Ideally, daily is what the school should be documenting. Now, as the kids get older and start to learn how to do those listening checks, how to troubleshoot their own equipment, it's appropriate to say, maybe just do a verbal check-in with that child twice a week and have that child check their stuff with a friend a few times a week, and begin to kind of pare those services back. But ultimately, it's on the school to make sure those are working. The only thing it does not apply to is the internal part of a cochlear implant. That also means if your child's battery dies at school, the school should have backup batteries. They should be able to troubleshoot basic issues, like clearing wax out of a mold if necessary, especially for our younger kiddos that aren't capable of doing that. But every time something like that happens, we've got an opportunity to teach a skill. You know, their hearing aid clogs with wax. That's a great time for someone to stop and go, okay, let's learn how to clean this out, because it might take 50 times for them to learn.
Exactly.
You know,
That's
we
really
start with, we change their batteries for them, and as they're older, we watch them change their batteries.
Right, right. And for those of you that are on the Facebook Live, we certainly want you to start asking questions. We're going to populate them in our chat. We're going to get to all of them. But if you have any questions, go ahead and type them in Facebook, and we want to get them answered for you, because Sarah's such an amazing resource. So just type those now, and then we'll capture them and take care of them at the end. You talked about, teaching the child to do that. And we're teaching them self-advocacy, right? When do they know what they need? One of the things that you talked about the other day that I thought was really interesting is sort of this conversation about when does a child, I have the conversation about when does a child need an interpreter? And so I'm assuming, because I'm an assumer, that that's based on a number of criteria. Can you kind of explain to us when you believe a child, if a child's identified from birth as deaf or hard of hearing, when would you consider or have a conversation about use of an interpreter?
First of all, it does not even have to be a child that is identified from birth. At any point, visual language could be a realistic option for a child. My own child did not begin signing fluently until the 7th grade. He was oral, listening, spoken language up to that point. And we found a need and a reason for him to make a switch. So that's important to note. Ultimately, it comes down to effective communication, equal access. And this is outside of our IDEA law, our 504 law. This goes all the way back to the Americans with Disabilities Act, which still applies to your child in a public school. Under the Americans with Disabilities Act, the school has to provide effective communication. What that means is we need to be making sure they are getting the same access to information as their hearing peers. Now, we know, even with the best technology and captioners and interpreters and a million other things, it is very rare that we get to the same level as their hearing peers. We are always trying to shore up that access. So for a child that really prefers visual access, that's our first clue. Are they watching people talk? Are they paying attention to visual aids? The need for an interpreter, like you said, it's based on a lot of things. And when they're very little, sometimes it's, do they need an interpreter, or do they need a teacher that teaches directly in ASL? Because an interpreter may even be too much for them still. But it all comes down to, are they getting effective communication? Sometimes we'll use a functional listening evaluation to help in making those determinations. And that's where we put a child in a classroom, ideally their own classroom. There's a certain specific level of background noise played, a speaker speaking at very specific distances. Oh, they brought me dinner, folks. Speaking at specific distances, and they say certain words or phrases and ask the child to repeat it back. And what we can gain from that is how much of the information is the child hearing correctly to the point that they could repeat it. Because we all know, if you ask a deaf or hard of hearing kid, did you hear me? The answer is always, yep, sure did. They hear everything. And they don't know what they didn't hear. So we can do a functional listening evaluation with voice and lips. We can do it with the FM system attached to their hearing aids. We can do it with voice and an interpreter, or any other combination of communication methods that may or may not be working for this child. And then we've got data. Data is my favorite. Goodness gracious, they keep bringing dinner.
Oh, lucky.
I know. So it may say that, in this listening situation, using only their hearing aids, they're catching 56% of the information. But when we added their FM system, it went up to 92%. Great. That FM system's effective for that child. And we know they're getting information out of it. And then we add the interpreter and they're getting 98% or whatever the numbers may be. We can clearly compare how a child is doing. Going back to that Deaf Child Bill of Rights, though, is also key. So in Texas, our Deaf Child Bill of Rights clearly states every child has the option and the opportunity to learn both ASL and English. So even if a child has not signed from birth, at any point they can choose to learn that language so that they are more capable of using an interpreter and can develop those skills. I did find the link for which states have the Deaf Child Bill of Rights.
Yes, and thank you for sending that. Then I'm going to ask what the word choose means.
So when we're talking about choose with a child, ultimately it's a parent's choice. The expectation is that we're respecting a child's choice and what their needs are. Kids clearly communicate through behavior what is and is not working for them. If a child is always exhausted and frustrated and inattentive and missing parts of lessons, we know what we're doing isn't working and we need to add something to shore it up. So those are all pieces we have to look at when we're determining, is that communication effective? The Department of Ed did a fantastic 38-page, I believe, guidance document on what is and is not effective communication. It is my little effective communication Bible. I love every minute of it.
Is that the OSEP letter that you sent me, Sarah?
Nope, this is a different one.
Okay.
And I just put that link in the chat as well.
Perfect.
It gives case studies on when certain things would be considered under an IEP versus under ADA law only. Because even if the IEP team doesn't necessarily agree a child needs it, has what we call an educational need, it may still be a reasonable accommodation. And whether or not a child should get an interpreter, there's just no simple, clear-cut answer. It is not easy. We have interpreting readiness checklists we'll look at, interviewing the child, seeing if they already have any ASL vocabulary. Sometimes it's a step-up approach, integrating more ASL in their day-to-day through, specific lessons or exposure. Or maybe using an interpreter for portions of the day that aren't as imperative at that point, or using it so that they gain more academic sign language. Because oftentimes, even if kids are signing at home, they may not have the academic language. And this is probably one of the bigger arguments we have within the schools and the deaf and hard of hearing community is, what makes the interpreter the right move? And I wish there was an easy answer. I really, 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 really do. For my child, it was the right answer because the content got too quick. He couldn't understand what his friends were saying. He had a number of reasons that CART captioning was not an effective choice for him. And he has never preferred to wear his technology. So we had to seriously look at getting more ASL exposure and getting him that interpreter. Some kids love CART captioning. Some kids are thrilled with their technology. It just depends on the kid.
I ask you like 85 questions around that. So good. So I had a kiddo that it was almost like he was punished, for lack of a better word. That's just my opinion, by the IEP committee because he didn't wear his hearing aids. And so I tried to change that around. Like I'm not a fan of the word least restrictive environment. I like to call it the most supportive environment, like a good pair of pantyhose, right? And so he wasn't successful with his hearing aids. Not that the parents hadn't tried a bunch of different hearing aids, different persons, but it wasn't a fit for him, for lack of a better word. Can you kind of describe to us, which you described perfectly for me, and that YouTube video is fantastic. I had no idea. I assumed before I met wonderful people like yourself that if you had hearing aids, oh, I can hear like Sarah can hear and I can hear. Can you tell us why that's a myth?
So hearing aids are ultimately tiny microphones on your head. And just like a microphone that you hold up to your face, the further your face gets from the microphone, the more distorted the sound becomes. Your hearing aids on your ears or your cochlear implant on your ears may only have a clear range of 3 to 5 feet around them where they're picking up information clearly. And that's without a lot of background noise competing. So, there's this little bubble of information. Even so we add an FM system, which is where a teacher or a peer wears a microphone that'll then pump their voice directly into those hearing aids, implants, or BAHA to bring that voice into that child's bubble. For a number of reasons, kids don't wear technology. And this, there's that whole, what's the unpopular opinion you have? Every doctor will tell you, eyes open, ears on. Well, I'm so glad doctors feel that way, but they haven't parented a deaf and hard of hearing kid. And that is so much easier said than done. Some kids just don't like them. They don't like the way they sound. They get headaches. They don't like the feel of them. And no amount of audiology appointments and tweaking programs or any of that will fix it for that child. And ultimately, we have to respect their choice when it comes to technology. The analogy I like to use is, if unfortunately someone were to lose their legs and chose to use a wheelchair, we would not berate them and insist that they use a prosthetic leg that they considered to be uncomfortable or cumbersome. That would be inappropriate. It wouldn't respect their bodily autonomy. And obviously, families play a big part into this. We have to respect parents' wishes for their child and do this all in a very sensitive way. But as a school, we cannot force a child to wear technology. We can encourage, in collaboration with the family. We can even set goals for increasing usage or wear if that's an appropriate goal for that child. But we can't duct tape it to their head.
We shouldn't.
And we shouldn't. And even if, my kid was a perfect example. I could make him put him in his ears all day long. And the second I wasn't paying attention, he would pop the battery door open a little so they were off, but on his head. Then he was just wearing earplugs.
Wow.
We see kids
They're smart, aren't they?
Yeah, we see kids that lose their equipment constantly.
Yeah.
Had a little child at my kid's karate gym, lost his equipment, found it later on in a trash can in the studio.
Oh, he must have jumped in the trash can.
Yeah, he was done. So yeah, there's a lot of respect for the child that has to happen there. Our Hands and Voices motto is what works for your child is what makes the choice right.
Right.
And I fully believe that's the case, especially with deaf and hard of hearing kids.
I had a kiddo in a situation that was denied direct services, and it was even DHH services, and it was captured literally in the deliberations. If he would just wear his hearing aids, then we could do the direct services. And I could be wrong. that seemed so discriminatory to me. Is that just a feeling I have?
I would personally agree. It's a bodily autonomy issue. This isn't even with my advocate hat on. This is as a human being, forcing someone to use a technology just doesn't seem logical or respectful of their person.
Right. I sort of relate it to when I'm in IEP meetings and, oh, your kiddo has ADHD. Have you thought about getting them medicine?
Yeah, we can't do that.
Yes. Yeah, we can't do that.
It's actually very similar to that.
Yes. Yeah. I
Very.
mean, isn't there something you could do? Yes. So one of the things that you described the other day, if you could describe it again, was you talked about, I know that, since we're in the world of Zoom and we probably will be virtual for the next 4,000 years. I know how tired I get at the end of the day staring at a screen. And you talked about kind of I might be saying it wrong, the cognitive load of an interpreter and lip reading and the FM system. Kind of share with us what that's about.
So we call it listening fatigue, and cognitive load is what it is. For deaf and hard of hearing kids, the research has shown that cognitive load, that fatigue they feel, is similar to that of a child undergoing cancer treatments on a regular basis. Their brain is double processing everything that comes in some way. They're either struggling to make sense of the speech sounds, or they're having to reinterpret the ASL coming into concepts, and incorporate everything happening in their environment.
Right.
So we can often tell when this is happening with kids when parents say things like, my 11-year-old is still coming home and taking a nap every day after school, or they're so tired that I could never dream of them doing a club or an extracurricular activity, because they're just exhausted. They have to go to bed so much earlier than anyone they know. And that's a big clue to us that there's something in their environment that's not getting them as complete of access as we would like.
Tell us a little bit about, and I'm sure I've thought the same way. We all have biases until we walk that road or walk somebody with that road, and then we realize, oh, we were wrong. I have a lot of kiddos. All of my kiddos are bright that I serve in special education in 504. And the parent was told by the wonderful district that she doesn't need an interpreter or ASL because she is a fantastic lip reader. And so I don't necessarily know why something isn't, Bill of Rights wrong, but I just that was wrong. Can you tell us why that's not a possible good response to a parent?
Because how are they going to guarantee she has access to someone's lips, especially in our mask heavy environment? What are they going to do every time the teacher turns around to write on the board? What are they going to do every time a friend is facing the other way? And yeah, we can work with kids to self-advocate on those issues, but ultimately we're asking her to process sound, and lip reading is not a science. We're asking her to decode pieces of information on the lips and hope for the best. Don't get me wrong, lip reading as a skill is incredible. We can collect data on a child's ability to lip read. A common one that's used is the Craig lip reading inventory. And that can help us understand how a child might function in casual one-off situations out in the community, ordering a meal for themselves, those sorts of things where there's a predictable dialogue. But it doesn't work well when it comes to new vocabulary, new concepts, the type of, fast information we're getting from the educational environment and from the various speakers we're getting in the educational environment. Because lip reading could be affected by the lipstick they wore that day. It could be affected by the color shirt they have on. It could be affected by the light they have behind them, causing a weird glare. It could be, and interpreters know how to manage all of that.
Right.
Your average person does not.
Okay. And so, one of the other things that I hear a lot from my kiddos that are DHH is, oh my gosh, they're so bright. I find that one of the most offensive words, although I like that on a Christmas tree. I like language that I can measure and serve. It also feels a little biased. I want to say, are the other kids not bright? And I think I know what people mean by that. Sometimes for my kiddos, that ends up being Achilles heel. Can we talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. When we say a kid's bright, it can mean two different things. Sometimes we have children that are genuinely bright, cognitively gifted children. Awesome. Oftentimes what we have is children who are working 3 times as hard as their peers in order to make the same work happen, and have come up with incredible coping skills and ways to work and manipulate their environment so that they can appear to function as their peers. And we call them bright. Those kids are bright in a way, but more than that, they're innovative, they're hardworking.
Right.
They are learning to think on their feet. They are learning to think flexibly. When we talk about deaf gain, all the bonuses that come with being deaf, it's one of the things that comes with it is these kids' ability to accommodate themselves in tricky situations. But again, it's adding to that cognitive load. It's adding to the work they're having to do. And we want to decrease that as much as possible so they can reach their real potential, not just the bare minimum.
Right. Do you hear about an expectation for grade level mastery? I know that, for instance, that USA Today is written on a 7th grade level. And, as I walk alongside of parents, I want to say that we have technologies that can support specific learning disabilities or neurological differences. Is there an overarching expectation of grade level proficiency for a child that's deaf and hard of hearing?
It's getting better. So back in the day, not that long ago, the misinterpreted research that was often quoted to parents was your child's never going to read past a 3rd grade level, or if they were reading and functioning past a 3rd or 4th grade level, that was expected, that was good for a deaf child. We now know that is not acceptable, that deaf and hard of hearing children, there is absolutely no reason they should not be doing their grade level skills at the same level as their hearing peers. Now, sometimes because of an initial language delay, we have to catch it up, but they can get there.
Right.
That we should never limit a deaf and hard of hearing kid to, well, it's good enough for a deaf child.
Right.
Yeah, that's a very, very frustrating thing that gets said.
Right. I know for kiddos that are at visual impairment, one of my arguments as I'm defending the rights for a child with disability is for a child with a visual impairment, there's no normed and standardized cognitive tests because those tests were normed and standardized on individuals that can see. So much conversation about eligibility for an intellectual disability. I also find that I feel like my kiddos that are DHH, they're weighted in that direction. Can you speak to that as it relates to a cognitive assessment?
Typically, it is best to either do some type of a nonverbal, especially if they're younger. And if they're older, we need to be sure any cognitive assessment we're giving them is interpreted appropriately for them. I mean, and literally with an ASL interpreter or whatever needs to happen, so that they are actually getting the information. And you're right, those tests aren't norm for them, but that is the closest to accurate information we can get. And part of dealing with a deaf and hard of hearing child is knowing that we can't look at one piece. We can never, and we shouldn't with any child, but we can never use one piece of data as our end all be all. We can know from a cognitive assessment that there's no reason they should be functioning significantly below grade level, or we can tell extremes. it's very difficult to tell details, specifics.
Okay, that's really good. So we have a question from a family. Her student is deafblind.
Mhm.
Said my child uses an AAC device to communicate. I'm so lost on how to get a closed captioning for her so she can symbol speak.
So I saw the question pop up in the chat. If I'm understanding this correctly, they're wanting the child to be able to see the symbols back to them, to be able to read the symbols that other people are using.
So she newly has a communication device. Obviously, it's a symbol system. I don't remember exactly what it is right now. Maybe Jeremy or Michelle, y'all can pop that in there. Is that what you guys are asking about, the symbols as it relates to connected to language, the specific symbol system? We can kind of come back to that. Mom also said, wow, thank you for that information. Now I know when my daughter comes home and passes out,
Yeah.
she's working her tail off. Another parent asked, is there a resource, Sarah, that speaks to that data for the cognitive load? This makes so much more sense. His daughter's completely exhausted after just a few hours of school.
Yeah, there's actually a lot of stuff out there on this, and what you'll actually see it listed under and what to search is listening fatigue. And I can put, yes, listening fatigue, and I can put a couple of links in the chat just to kind of get you started. One website I love that touches a lot on all of this is Supporting Success for Kids with Hearing Loss. And they have a lot of great articles on that, but I can definitely add some things to the chat on that listening fatigue specifically. Wanted to see.
And then the mom said that her student uses a touch chat symbol system.
Okay. I guess I'm just still not I guess I'm just still not understanding the question. What are we asking for that we're struggling to get? So we have the symbol system. It's speaking for us. Are we wanting to see others speak back to us in symbols?
So, so Michelle, can you give some clarification around that? So are you wanting her, so we just got the student an intervener. Yay. They just took the TSBI training, which is amazing. Wherever you are watching this, Texas State School for the Blind and Visually Impaired, they're ridiculously amazing. An intervener is somebody that provides educational product for a student deafblind. And so I think that one of her questions is, let's see if she put something else in there. Speak back in symbols. How does she speak back in symbols? So I know the great Dr. Deanna Linick, who I've interviewed before, and she's on our YouTube channel, Special Education Academy. She actually has a software that as I speak, right, the symbols actually come out on a device, right? So I think that might be Michelle's question. How does she speak back to her in symbols?
So yeah, I mean, that would ultimately come down to, again, showing effective communication. How are we speaking the same language this child is speaking, and in what way? So if this child is learning to communicate and understand using symbols, then certainly there's a very good argument for some sort of a device system software that would allow you to do the same.
And should we require that of somebody in the school, right? So there's much conversation around, I'm very visual, so I have a wonderful friend who's an interpreter who said, you know, if you have an interpreter with somebody who also, they're signing to each other, right? And we have so many kiddos, for whatever reasons, that are using a VOCD, right, an AAC, and nobody else is. So, or somebody comes over and takes their device. Do you have any information around that? Like what the requirement is? Obviously, if I'm learning English in 3rd grade, there's a teacher teaching me English, right? So for a kiddo that's DHH that uses a VOCD, what would your recommendation around that be?
I'm to be totally honest, AACs and the symbol picture systems are not my specialty. My recommendation would be going back to effective communication. Effective communication has to be provided by the school in all scenarios, breaking it down scenario by scenario. In this situation, how is this child communicating expressively, and how are they getting information in, and breaking that down piece by piece and understanding it could look different in different situations.
Right. That's perfect. You had provided me with the IDEA final regulations for pertaining to deaf education audiology. I find a lot of my kiddos have no audiological services, but they have an FM system. We're just out here winging it. I think I had somebody at a meeting the other day, I won't tell you what state, and he said, I think we got some guy at the district that does IT. I was like, no. I think that maybe he was like a DJ on the weekends. I was like, no, we will wait for an audiologist. Can you talk about that?
Yeah. So yeah, audiology is absolutely a related service specifically mentioned in IDEA and not something to be ignored. This is kind of one of those hot topics in deaf and hard of hearing education, is the legal liability of a school to provide audiology services, and even so far as to provide hearing aids and what counts as assistive technology. This has not been fully litigated. And so we don't have a really great precedent for how this has to be applied. But we know the law specifically calls out the need for those services and the availability of those services. It is typically advised to schools that at minimum they have an audiologist that they contract with on an as needed basis. And it is a perfectly reasonable request for an IEP or even a 504 to have those audiology as a related service. That can include evaluations, that can include programming, that can include ear molds for those that wear hearing aids or ear molds with their cochlear implants. It does not include cochlear implant mapping. That is specifically excluded from the way the law is written. But that's a very, very specialized service. But yeah, all of that can and should be included as part of a child's IEP process. Now, all that to say, I know a lot of families who don't necessarily want that included. They're happy for someone at the district to know how to use and function and work the FM system, and they would love an audiologist for that. But when it comes to their child's personal devices and their hearing tests and all of that, they would prefer to take them to the person they know, the pediatric audiologist they've had forever, etc. In those cases, what I tell families is you write in what you might need in case of emergency. Your doctor moves, you all lose your jobs, something crazy happens. What would you need then?
Right. Perfect. You touched on something. When I'm in meetings, I want to get it right for my kiddo. So all things being perfect, is it an assumption that if you have an IEP, the DHH services, itinerant services, and you are deaf and hard of hearing, that you would need AI services?
There is no assumption for direct instruction from a teacher of the deaf. It's just not federally supported that is an assumption. We do have cases where it's appropriate for a child to receive consult only, or it's appropriate for a child to receive eventually to not receive direct instruction and go on to a 504. It's not a clear cut. What we want to be sure of is that we are exploring all the possible needs before we make that determination.
Right. And so for my kiddos, whether it's OT or whatever it is, I want to deliver that instruction and then move to consult, right? Because we've taught them that skill. I guess for me, it's hard to understand how a kiddo could just be consult, period. Because while I love adults teaching teachers, I kind of think the individual with a disability need some direct instruction. Is that reasonable?
It's reasonable, and it depends on the child and the age and their hearing loss and a million other things. It's not unreasonable, for sure. But I wish there were clearer answers. It is such a muddy water. I know there were things for my child to work on with a teacher of the deaf all the way through high school, even though he was a straight A student. Some families may not want direct instruction to continue that long. Some families may not see the need for some of the things that I felt the need for. You know, and then there's a really harsh reality piece of all of this. And, you know, we never like to talk about money and school funding and all of that sort of stuff. But the one big problem we really truly do have, and the biggest limitation, is we don't have enough deaf and hard of hearing teachers. There is nowhere close to enough of these human bodies to go around. And as parents, you know, we want to be the squeaky wheel, and we want to get the best we possibly can for our child. Absolutely. And the squeaky wheel gets the grease. I believe that firmly. But especially as our kids get older and their needs decrease, I think it's important for us to ask hard questions of the district, even when they don't want to answer. Because as a parent, there's a big difference between we just don't want to provide you that service, and I don't know how I would find a staff member to do that right now. Can we think outside of the box to meet this need another way? And I think, you know, the deaf hard of hearing world is small. Our teachers tend to become family. They work with our kids from birth on up. And having a good relationship with your district in that way becomes important when it comes to some of those things, to be able to say, okay, you know, can you come 45 minutes every other week? You know, I know you say you can't do it every week. Can we do every other week? Can we maybe Zoom in sometimes instead of come in person? You know, could you record something for them to watch, and maybe you can distribute it to a couple of kids at once? How can we think outside the box to still get these kids' needs met, while understanding we cannot just create more humans out of thin air? Because it's not like these school districts aren't begging and pleading people to come work for them.
Right.
The bodies just don't exist.
Right.
So I just like to put that caveat out there, because it is a sticky situation in deaf hard. I mean, it's a sticky situation in teaching in general right now. But if you look at how hard we're struggling to get good special education staff in general and good education staff in general, and then you apply it to deaf and hard of hearing staff, man.
The gap's even bigger, right?
Yeah, we have to be willing to be flexible thinkers. How can we still meet the need, but maybe do it in a slightly different way?
Yeah, that's a great way of looking at it. I never thought about every other week. So just real quick, because I know it's close to midnight, we're all going to turn into pumpkins, but thank you so much for your time. And again, if you guys, anybody on Facebook has a question, go ahead and pop those in. We still want to answer them. But two of the resources that you sent me, which were just gold, the IEP meeting planner, your child's IEP or case conference meeting. I was in Indiana today. We were case conferencing. Can you tell us a little bit about that? And could you share that resource? And then also the parent IEP attachment, which I thought was like having a little advocate with you, because this is kind of what I do for my clients. They don't know that I'm doing this, so I just want you to know I'm going to steal this. But this is so good, the parent IEP attachment, and kind of talk through those two things, because I think that, well, I do know parents are very passionate, and my job as an advocate, I hope, is to, you know, segue parent passion with educational need, right? And sometimes we're speaking different languages, right? We want the same thing, but we are talking two different languages. So can you talk about the IEP planner first, and then the attachment?
Yeah. So if you go to the National Hands and Voices Astra page, you can find those resources, our educational advocacy book, and a lot more resources there as well. So if you're looking for all of that, it's in one spot. The IEP meeting planner really takes you as a parent step by step through what you need to do to prepare for that meeting. What are your goals for your child? Where are they at currently? What questions do you have? And walks you through it step by step. It's a beautiful little document, and you're certain to gain information from it. The PEI attachment is what we call it. The other
Oh,
attachment,
good. Yeah.
it's simple. It is the simplest thing.
It's
It's a
so
little,
simple.
it's a little graphic organizer, little boxes, nothing fancy. Yeah, very simple. And all it does is it gives us a space to write down, here are the things we're asking for in this meeting. Plan ahead, fill it out ahead of time. And then during the meeting, keep track of those things and keep the conversation on track. And make sure we get an answer to our questions. How many times have we said, oh, make sure we ask for this thing. We start talking in circles about it, and we never get a yes or a no. So we can look back at our little PEI attachment and go, oh, wait, was this a yes or a no? What did we decide? And if it's a yes, it gives us a spot to document. When's that going to start? Who's going to do it? Get it all down. And if it's a no, as a parent, it gives us a spot to document the school's reasoning why. And then the beauty of this PEI attachment is when it's done, the meeting's over, as a parent, you've got your notes there. You can then take that PEI attachment and send it to the school and say, can you just attach this to the IEP deliberations and notes? So there's no question about what you asked for, what the answers were. There's no guessing. And we can cut down on oftentimes the arguing and the occasional hostility that can come up. As a parent, if we can walk in with a plan and we know what our questions are and we know what our resources are, our job is to ask our questions and present our resources and be a communicating member. But if the school does put us in a situation where they have determined it's a no, instead of, letting our emotions take over, we can really focus on, okay, I'm going to document this. I'm going to make sure it's in their documentation so that no matter what my next steps are, whether I decide to continue through with some sort of other process or drop it, I know my documentation's in order.
So stinking good, which is what we say in Texas. I always record my meetings because I'm an old person and we record, so we remember what was said, right? Sarah and I could be talking and Sarah got a puppy and the mom goes, I think I'm getting a service dog. No, Sarah said she got a puppy, right? And so this is so vital. This is what we do as advocates. We go in there with that plan. I think that the other thing that I would add to that is that if there is a no for parents, who told you no? Because sometimes it's just my experience that the no is because I don't know, or I don't know what expanded core curriculum is, so it's no, right? And so I think that's important that we capture both of those, but this is just huge. So avail yourself of that. And then the IEP meeting planner, I was like, you're such a smarty pants. Because really, we go in there, it's sort of like going into the grocery store hungry, and you come out with $300 of the groceries, except for the one thing that you wanted. So plan, communicate, execute, and then anticipate a successful student outcome. So I just think this is gold. So if they would like to abduct you and be best friends with you and get more resources from you, because I know that I've ordered the books, please go online and order the books. I've printed out tons of her information. They also have trainings. How could somebody get a hold of Texas Hands and Voices?
So if you're looking for us at Texas Hands and Voices, we're at www.txhv.org, where you can find us on Facebook or Instagram or TikTok or wherever else. And then if you are not in Texas, you can go to our national page, handsandvoices.org. Visit our Astra page there, find resources, find programs in your state. There are people like me in most US states and at our national level. We have a really great network of advocates and informed people throughout the US. And they're happy to help you as a family. They're happy to help you as an advocate support a family. Really, whatever you need, we are here to help.
Well, we can't thank you enough, Sarah. Everybody in the comments are like, you are incredible, amazing. And you have those boys bringing you dinner. Maybe you could give us a training on how our teenagers can bring us dinner. That would be fun. So
I have the best
thank
kids.
you. Yes, thank you. I'm sure that we will have you back on because we'll have many more questions, but thank you so much for your resources and thank you for collaborating with everybody at the 504 table. We really appreciate it.
Yes, thank you. It was wonderful.
Thank you.